Hey, Peeps Galucia here, and today I'm going to be giving you my first impressions review of Grid 2. First, I wanted to quickly explain how I'm going to lay this out for you. I'm going to be showing you footage from the beginnings of my gameplay. This is the first few races and things that I actually did in the game, and is a big part of what I'm basing my conclusions on for my rating. This is about half of what I've done so far in the game. I've actually played a little bit more to get more of a sense of the game. But instead of just breaking it down into clips for you, I wanted to show you the actual experiences of what I did to get me to these conclusions. Also, this is just a review of the single-player campaign for right now. If everybody enjoys the review and likes what I'm doing here, I plan on doing a second review that focuses on the online gameplay. They're two very separate things for this game, and they have very different functions. So I wanted to cover them separately. So we're only going to get into the single-player campaign for the purposes of this review. So when I was thinking about doing a review for a game, I started thinking about what I would do to review it, how I would break it down, and I've decided to break it down into 4 basic categories and then give it my overall rating. So to start off, we're going to start with gameplay, obviously one of the more important things that you're going to have in the game. For the gameplay, I've actually broken it down into 2 basic subcategories, and that is the controls and the meta game. So for the controls, this is a racing game. Obviously, the controls are very important, and the feel of the car is going to be really important as to whether or not the game is enjoyable for you. I have to admit at first, since this is my first impressions type review, and I'm only basing this off of about an hour and a half or so of gameplay, at first it did seem a little loose, that the steering wasn't as tight as I would like. Now I'm playing this on my PlayStation 3 and I'm not using a steering wheel or something like that, although I have a steering wheel. I wanted to use what most people are going to be using when they play this game, which is just the standard PlayStation 3 DualShock 3 controller. When using that controller, it seems a little hypersensitive, that when I was pushing to the left or the right, the tiniest adjustments on the thumbstick could equal a great deal of oversteer on the car. Having said that, I think that was partially due to the fact of just the car that they start you off on. That you start off with a classic Mustang, which traditionally and classically does not have good handling skills. So it could have partly been done to that. I ended up using some other types of cars later in the game, some import cars that are known for tighter handling, and it did improve a little bit. It still feels a little bit loose even with the other cars that I tried, but not as bad. But I don't like how they start you off with a Mustang, so right away you get the feeling that this game is going to be very unruly and hard to control. Having said that, it does clean up nicely, as I said, throughout the game, and overall, I would give the controls a 4 out of 5. Then there's the meta game. For me, meta game is insanely important. For me, I like to feel like I'm accomplishing something, that when I'm playing a game, that I'm not just doing it for the sake of doing it. I'm not just playing a racing game for the love of the game. I actually want to feel like I'm accomplishing things again and again and again. Certain games do this really well. Gran Turismo 5 comes to mind with the currency that you earn to go out there and buy more cars. You can upgrade the cars, so on and so forth. There's a lot you can do that on a more detailed level that makes it worth racing, that you feel like, okay, I get this money and I'm using it to do all these different things, and it's a reward system. Having said that, Grid 2 does not have the most in-place meta system for the single player. It seems like they actually have more for the online stuff, but we'll get to that later. As far as I can tell, with the meta game for Grid 2's single player campaign, there's really not a whole lot there. You do races, and some of those races are going to earn you cars. There's no money involved at all. You're not earning any type of currency or anything like that. The only thing that you earn every race is popularity. Every time you win a race or do a race, you gain more fans, and this is kind of like a popularity gauge to be able to tell whether or not you're doing a good job. Other than that, there's nothing else that you really actually earn. So depending on the types of races that you're doing will depend on whether or not you actually earn any cars. Now there's lots of livery, which means you can customize the appearance of your vehicle, and make it look exactly how you would like to make it. You can also transfer this look throughout all the different cars in your garage. So if you want all your cars to have the same appearance like a race team would, you can do that. And there are a lot of options here for customizing the outside appearance of your car. There's nothing that you can do in the single player campaign though to upgrade the individual cars. When you get a car, that's it. It's the way that it is. If you have a Mustang, like when you first start out, and one of your competition has a Mustang, you can guarantee that you both have the exact same Mustang because there is no upgrading to these vehicles. That's a little disappointing. As I said, in the online mode, there is a lot of upgrading and stuff like that. They get a lot more into the metagame with online, and that's good for online, and we'll get to that at a later time. But I don't know why they ended up deciding to make the single-player campaign so limited in this. For the metagame, I'm unfortunately going to have to give this only a 2.5 out of 5. Little bit of a letdown. So overall for the gameplay, I would say it's about a 3 out of 5. The most important things is the handling of the cars, and it's not that bad. If you like drifting, then it's going to be a little bit favored towards you. That drifting is a little bit more rewarded in this game than it would be in a more realistic simulator like Gran Turismo 5, but it's a lot of fun, and I do actually enjoy playing the game, so that the handling doesn't take away from that. It is enjoyable. So next up is the graphics. This is more important to some people than others, but the appearance of a game is a big deal. That if the graphics fall short, it really suffers the immersion of the game, that you don't feel like you're there racing along because of the lack of realistic graphics. So we're going to get into the graphics, and I'm going to do that by going over 3 basic categories: the overall appearance of the game, the special effects of the game, and then the minor details, the little things that set it apart. So the overall appearance is actually pretty good. I would have to say that, again, I'm playing this on PlayStation 3. We're still in the current generation. And based on other PlayStation 3 racing games, I would have to say that this is easily on par with some of the better racing games graphics-wise. That the models for the cars, the crowds on the side, the scenery, everything is very good, detailed. It's exactly where I would expect it to be with a PlayStation 3. There's only so far you can go with the current generation. Unfortunately, you know, Grid 2 was coming out for PlayStation 3. We're almost there. We're almost at a PlayStation 4. And it came out for PlayStation 3, so this is really, I think, the best that we can expect to get from our current generation console. So it's a very good-looking game. I would have to say a 4.5 out of 5 for the overall appearance of the game. Now, for the special effects, these also perform pretty well. And when I say special effects, I mean the little effects that happen within the game, whether it's fire and smoke coming out of the exhaust, the smoke from the tires when you peel around a corner. It's the little effects like that, and all of them are on point. They're exactly where you expect them to be, and they're not exaggerated. They're pretty realistic. That in certain cars, you're going to get more of like a flame out of the exhaust than you would with others during like downshifts, things like that. When you're going into a really tight turn, maybe you're peeling the tires a little bit, there's smoke, but there's not an obscene amount of smoke. Everything seems pretty realistic and on par with where it should actually be, so the effects look really good. Overall, for the effects, I would definitely have to say a 4 out of 5. Now, the minor details are the little things that can take away from a game. For me, there's 2 things with a racing game as far as details. It's the minor details of the cars themselves. I already spoke on how the car models look good, but when you really get close to them, which you can in this because it does have a very detailed outside of appearance of the car as far as changing what everything looks like, you can really get into that. Because you can look really up close to these cars, I want them to look as close to the real thing as possible, and they really do. So on that mark, they hit it head on. The main way that they fall short in the graphics department and in those details is that there's no cockpit view. And a lot of people that play racing games like having the cockpit view, and that's really good for the overall gameplay and the immersion of the game. That if you're sitting in the cockpit view, it makes you feel like you're actually in the car, especially if you have some kind of steering wheel to actually drive the car with instead of a controller. There's a great deal of immersion there, and it really makes you feel like you're in the race. The lack of the cockpit view is a bit of a letdown. Not everybody enjoys the cockpit view, so it's not super critical, but for those that do, this is a pretty big letdown. For that reason, I have to give the details a 3.5. But the overall graphics, I'm still going to give them a 4 out of 5. They're pretty solid graphics, and this is a really good-looking game. Now, our next category is sound. Especially for certain games, and racing games fall into that category, the sound of the game can make or break the game. That if the game doesn't sound right, if the cars don't sound right, if the track and the way that you're driving across the surface doesn't sound right, then again, you're going to lose that immersion and you're going to lose the quality of the game. So let's talk about the different categories of sound. You have the music of the game, the commentary, which can be narration. For driving games, it could be like whoever's in your cockpit, whoever's talking to you over like some kind of radio or whatever. And the effect sounds, the sounds of the car, the sounds of the track, the screeching tires, all those types of things. So with the music, there is none. There's a little bit of music in the menu and things like that, but in the actual game, I think they go for more of an immersion thing, which is pretty common with Codemasters, that they don't have a lot of music during the races, that's not their style. They want you to be immersed in the driving experience. And to be fair, if you were in a real-life race, a professional closed-circuit race, you wouldn't be playing music. You'd be focusing on the race. So that's fine. I can understand their view on that. So for some people, they're going to not be happy with the lack of music, that all you can hear is the car itself, the commentator that's talking over the radio. There's nothing to distract you from the race itself and all the other sounds of the game. For me, I actually think this is a good thing, that I think the music would have taken away from it, and especially if the music would have been nice if the game fell short in other categories, but as I'm about to discuss, it doesn't as far as the other audio categories. So you want to hear the sounds of the car, you want to get that feedback from the way that the game sounds, and the music would have distracted from that. So overall, if you like music, this is definitely a bad thing for you, but I think the lack of music is a good thing, and I'm going to give that part a 4 out of 5. Now, if there's any one category in the sound department that it does fall short on, it is the commentary. There's a lot of unnecessary commentary going on while you're driving. The guy that's in your cockpit or whatever that keeps talking to you over the radio, he gets to be a bit annoying at times and a bit repetitive. You'll notice that after you go to the same track several times, as I did in the beginning because I wanted to get first place in this one specific track where I kept getting third, that he kept saying the same thing when you first got to the track. He kept saying like a couple of the same types of lines like along the track. It got very repetitive. There's not enough variety in what he's saying. Sometimes he says stuff that you actually think might be useful feedback, but I'm not sure if it's based on any actual stats or if he's just randomly saying it. I'll do a lap, and then on the next lap he'll say, watch out in section 3, you were a little bit loose that time, or whatever, that, warning me that I didn't do that good through the third section of the lap and that I need to do better next time. But it's hard to tell if that's actually based on actual feedback or if he's just randomly saying it. I can't really pin that down, and he does seem to say it somewhat often at times when I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. So I'm not even sure if that's actual feedback or not. Other than that, it's just little things about the track or about the opponents that you're up against. And if you race against the same opponent several times, which you're bound to do, he's going to end up saying the same thing about them. So that gets kind of old. I do wish there was more variety. So for this, I'm going to give a 3 out of 5 on the commentary. Now, last and most important for the sound, and one of the most important things for the game, in my opinion, is this effects sounds. And that's mostly going to be the sounds of the cars and the car's interaction with its environment. This is awesome. The sound of the engines is very real and very believable. I'm pretty sure they would have had to have recorded a lot of actual real-life engine sounds to get this type of realism. I'm sure there's an amazing amount of detail that went into that because these effects sound great. The sounds of your tires screeching across the road, very real, very believable. If you do hit things, whether it's an impact with another vehicle, a wall, all of these things come into play. And again, all of these sound very real. There's really nothing in the game that at any point I thought sounded off at all with the effects. I think all of these are spot on, and I think that's crucial to the immersion of the game. And as I mentioned before, with the lack of music, you can really hear all of these sounds. So that's a bold move. You put music in a game, and it might be masking a little bit where you might be falling short in other sound effects. But with this one, they took the music out, and said, we have an amazing sound here, that the game sounds awesome, that you want to hear those screeching tires. That's usable feedback. Depending on how much you hear that sound of the screeching tires, you might be able to tell before you can even visually see it that your car is starting to slide a little too much or whatever. Like, you can actually use this as feedback, and I think the more you play this game, the more that's going to be actual usable feedback to how you're performing in the race, that the sound effects are that good and that believable. So for the effects, I'm going to give them a 5 out of 5. So overall for the sound, I'm going to say a 4 out of 5. That the only reason that this doesn't get a perfect 5 out of 5 on the sound is because of that commentary being a little bit annoying, but other than that, the sound is great and I absolutely love it. One of my favorite features of the game. So my overall rating of the game, well, all things considered, it hit big on most of the areas where it needed to come through and be a solid game. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. That the few areas where it did fall a little bit short ended up holding it back in the end, but overall, I consider this game a solid 4 out of 5. I consider the replayability of the game significantly high, even though it does lack the metagame, which does really help with replayability. I did already find myself replaying the same track several times when I got a high enough position to beat the level and complete the challenge. I had to place like in the top 3. I placed 3rd, but I really wanted to get that first place. The game really made me want to succeed and get first place, so there is some significant replayability to the game as well. So a solid 4 out of 5, but again, remember, this is only for the single-player campaign rating, and that I'm going to treat the online feature of it completely separately. Although the review of the actual game itself in terms of the graphics and the sound, things like that, all remains the same, obviously, for the online mode, but that the metagame is significantly different for the online mode, and based on how they match you up with other drivers and interacting with your friends on your lists and so on and so forth can play a major part on whether or not the online features are good or not. So overall rating 4 out of 5, and if you enjoyed this review, since this is something kind of new for me, comment below, let me know what you thought of it and whether or not you'd like to see that online review. I'd like to give you an online review and keep going with this game at least a little bit just to show you a little bit more of it. So let me know if you'd like to see that. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will see you next time. Laters!